You have no idea the fucking collusion that went on last year. This isn't even accurate shit, man. Get the fuck out of here.
Wow.
No, seriously, Aaron. A lot of weird shit happened last year. This guy literally stuck his big black dick in my ass and fucked me.
Did you just say anal?
That should be a red flag to you. That's a problem, right?
I like big penises in my butthole.
Because it's just, you see that and you're like, hey, this is a misguided soul. You know, it's a lost soul out here in the fantasy landscape.
Hello and welcome to the third episode of The League Fantasy Football Podcast. And gentlemen, not ladies and gentlemen, just gentlemen, we have a special guest today. His name is Aaron Watkins, my good friend. He is, in my opinion, a fantasy football guru. And this podcast is mainly about being dumb and stupid and goofy, but we got to have a little bit of expertise and fun involved into this. So I want Aaron to come on here, kind of tell you, how you got into fantasy, what attracted you to fantasy, and then take it from there.
Well, first off, I would just like to say that he is a fantasy guru. He takes kickers before the last round in every draft. No, I'm just kidding. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, such an illustrious introduction. I guess, for me, man, with fantasy football, started when I was 14. That was the first league I ever did on NFL.com. Growing up in Baltimore, obviously huge Ravens fans, so, football was always a big thing.
That's pretty close.
Well, I mean, we're looking pretty good nowadays. But, yeah, I think, it started for me. I remember my first ever draft. I think my first pick was a guy named Kevin Johnson, like running back for the Detroit Lions. Terrible
I have
pick.
No idea who that is.
Exactly. It went completely horribly. But I don't know. There was just something about it that I saw other people were, they had better teams. So I said, okay, this is something you can get better at. Fast forward to graduating college, I had been doing season long basically every year since I was 14 years old.
Now, let me ask you this real quick. Sorry to interject, but are you saying that you had break down the roster? Was it 8 teams? Was it 10, 8 players, 10 players, 12 players? Like, how did you know what I'm saying?
So, for that very first season, or just for all those seasons?
Well, every season until out of college.
I mean, for the most part, I've tried everything from 8-man leagues to 16-man leagues.
Nice.
Now, 16-man leagues, I say it's just not a place to go. It's just a painful experience. 14-man leagues, really tough, but it's doable. I think 12 teams is really the sweet spot as far as competitiveness and still being able to have an edge. 10 teams, I think if you have an edge, you can really dominate. And 8 teams, same thing. If you have an edge, it can be a slaughter. I'm in one 8-man league that started last season. And so it's had 2 years, and I won the championship, both of those seasons primarily off of the draft because it's only 8 teams. So if you go into that with preparation, it's just a huge, huge edge. But the sweet spot.
That's weird because, and I'm trying not to laugh as I say this. Our first draft ever, as friends, was 6 people.
Okay.
And I still was second to last. And then the next year was 8 people. And I still was second to last. So you saying, I mean, if you have 8 people, pretty much you're gonna win. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but in your case, it was.
Well, again, what I mean is, if you have an edge, and I guess, I should clarify what I mean by that. Like the basic idea, what I learned, playing a whole bunch of years is fantasy football is really just a numbers game. It's I think a lot of times people go into fantasy football saying, "Oh, I've watched football my whole life. I love football. I've played football. So I'm going to know fantasy. I'm going to know who's good. I'm going to know who's not." And the fact of the matter is, all of the information, all of the data on the game shows that you're going to be wrong more often than you're going to be right. So a lot of it is really about understanding when to embrace risk, and then also understanding when to be safe, or cautious. And,
So hang on, you're getting into, I know you're excited. I'm excited too, because I know, but that's a little bit later on, the questions I want to ask. Mainly I want to ask you, Aaron, and I've actually never asked you this before in all of our, us hanging out and shit. What really drew you to fantasy football? Like, if you could say,
what got him hooked?
What's one thing where you're like, shit, all right, I'm fucking in, I love it. What is it?
Like one word?
No, just like one thing about fantasy. Like one, I don't know, not word, but like I guess like what drew you into it?
The best way I think I can put it is that it's, I think, really skills based. I think that's the best way I can put it.
God damn it. I'm so glad you said that. Please elaborate.
Well, so basically to me, that being a draw, I think, if something is skill based, then one, it's probably hard, right? Because you have to have a skill that's developed. And two, it means that it is something that can be mastered to an extent. So of course, golf is a perfect example, right? It's a skill. If you work, theoretically, if you put enough hours into developing that skill, then you can achieve a level of success in the game. And it's similar for a lot of things. So in fantasy football, I think it's the same thing. It's preparation, it's experience, it's reading, experimentation, all of that. I think that's what
listening to podcasts.
That's a serious thing. I mean, if you talk about how I personally learned and how I got better, it was when I discovered the information community, including podcasts.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, but just, I mean, to everyone who doesn't understand, me and Aaron have worked together now, peak and size. So that's what, 3 years, right?
Yeah.
So even before you started listening to the Fantasy Football Podcast, I can remember conversations. I just think that you have a certain understanding of risk versus reward when it comes to gambling. And fantasy football people, okay, and right now, this is obviously just for our 12-man league, and it's it's super dumb. But there's obviously a lot of other 12-man friend leagues out there where there's probably one guy who can understand, floor and ceiling terms I had no idea about until me and you had conversations. So I just think that, let me ask you this question, Aaron. Do you think that there's a certain natural ability to be able to be successful in fantasy football, winning money, or just in a normal friend football league, or no?
My personal answer would be no. But full disclosure, I definitely think, and I've met people who would say yes. I've watched interviews from daily fantasy pros or sports betting pros who do feel that instinct, and some kind of gut understanding of the game is crucial. But then you also have people who think that it's really a hindrance. I think it really just depends on how. I think the first thing, and this might sound corny and maybe like overly dramatic, but I really believe the first key to being a good fantasy player is to understanding who you are as a fantasy player.
It's so corny, but it makes sense. It makes sense.
Well, because it's art of war, right?
Yes.
First thing is you know thyself, right? So you have to know, what is your risk tolerance? What kind of player are you? You have to know your opponents. It's a lot like poker. It's not about just getting, saying, oh yeah, I come into every draft, I'm the smartest in the room, I know who's going to hit. They call that the gambler's fallacy, right?
Gosh, I have the gambler's fallacy then. Jesus.
A lot of people do, and especially if it gets confirmed by, any form of success. If you win one championship, then now it's, oh, yeah, I'm good now. Because I've won in the past, I'm going to win again in the future. I'm good. I know what I'm doing. When really every year is a different puzzle. Every single season is its own puzzle. It's its own game. And it doesn't really care. Your fantasy league doesn't care what you did the year before. Like the people do. But the players, the system, right, ESPN, it doesn't care what you did last year. It only cares what you do this season.
True.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I just want to say before you start, Malcolm.
Oh my God, here we go.
I'm not going to bring up the championship, even though I do that.
Okay, hang on. Kyle, wait, Aaron, I don't think I've told you this yet. Maybe I did. Stop me if I did. Kyle, when he won this last year's championship.
Congratulations.
Shout out. Thank you.
He texted the group and asked for all of our addresses.
Okay.
And we all were kind of like, we sent the addresses really not knowing. It was kind of weird. Like, you're in like fantasy football league. So the champion guy says, hey, what's your address? You kind of like go, whatever. Okay, here you go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, so I sent that, and about 5 days later, I got a letter in the mail from Kyle, and it was handwritten.
Oh, wow.
Basically saying, I'm sorry that this particular thing happened to you in your fantasy season, but it helped me win, so thank you. He sent that to every single person.
Wow.
Yeah, all 11 other members.
I had a picture, but I got a new phone. Aaron, it's actually really fucking funny.
Yeah, and to go along with that, I also sent in monthly videos. One of them, I was in the bathtub with bubbles all around me, completely naked, drinking champagne, just boasting that I won the championship. So, I mean, I went a little overboard, but you never know when that opportunity is going to happen again. So I took advantage of it.
Seize the day.
Yeah, and I think it's really good that we have you on, Aaron, because a couple episodes ago we were talking about Malcolm and how he finishes bottom half of the league every year. Second worst record every year. Besides last year, he did improve. So maybe he can take what you're saying to heart and put it to use.
Well, last year, me and Aaron were working together, and I picked his brain. And come to find out, fucking Thomas Pierda has been texting Aaron on the back burner asking questions. So you know what? You know what I'm doing this year? I'm doing this year. I said, Aaron, no, fuck that. We need an expert to come on, give us all the advice so we have a fucking fair game. Aaron is number one, guys. If you're listening, you know how we're doing the auction style waiver wire. That was Aaron's idea, and that's going to be also one of the questions I'm going to ask him later on. So, first question, Aaron, is you told me one time your fantasy draft, okay, can make or break a season. Why?
Well, I mean, I think the most obvious reason is that's everyone's first pass at getting players, right? So you're going to start a season with a roster. That roster is determined by who you got in the draft. So the idea is you can't, my opinion is you can't actually win your league in the draft, but you can definitely lose it. Perfect example is, I'm in a league that last season I ended up with the number one pick, and I took Saquon Barkley with the first pick, which ended up obviously being a mistake in hindsight.
Real quick, how many leagues are you in? Last year, how many leagues were you in? I can't remember. Was it 5?
Last year was either 5 or 6. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a healthy amount.
It's not healthy. That's psychotic.
A little more. I think 3 is like perfect. But yeah, I mean, that example though, you take Saquon with your first pick. That same team, I had guys like Jameis Winston who finished top 5. Despite sort of the
everything, yeah,
around who he is or whatever. Kyler Murray who finished top 10.
Shout out, shout out, sleeper. Thank you.
Guys like that, Austin Eckler, that team didn't make the playoffs, right? Because your first pick is really, really critical. You can't actually stress it enough. So yeah, I've seen people take crazy players in the first round. I think the worst pick I ever saw. If you guys remember Chester Rogers, he was the backup, Adrian Peterson. Somebody took him when Adrian Peterson was like still, at the top of his game. Somebody took him in the second round, and they, that person still has not won a championship.
Yeah,
it's an example of what can happen.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter the other day where somebody was doing a live draft. They had the second pick in the draft, so obviously first pick was McCaffrey, and the second pick, the guy wanted to take Saquon Barkley, but hit the wrong Barkley and selected Matt Barkley.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's almost impossible to recover from. I mean, it is possible, but you're gonna have to. I mean, I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this or not.
Please fucking curse.
Oh,
okay.
Shit. You're gonna have to work your ass off.
Whatever. Yeah,
you're gonna have to work your ass off in order to make up for that kind of thing.
So, what I realized is talking with you last year was that drafting is important. So, let's say you're talking right now to me and Kyle plus 10 different dudes who think that they all are smart about fantasy football, which we're not. What are some tips and tricks for picking the perfect, if not close to perfect, roster in your draft?
As far as picking the perfect roster from the draft,
if not perfect, I'm not saying perfect. I'm saying okay, what are some? Okay, Aaron, I know when you draft, what do you do? What's your process?
Okay, sure. So my number one, first of all, for me, it starts with, again, right, knowing who I am. So I go in saying I'm the dumbest guy in the room. I'm the guy that knows the least. I'm the guy who understands football the worst. Whether or not that's true, that's the assumption I make going into every league. So the way that I try to overcome that deficiency is to just arm myself with a ton of knowledge first. And what that looks like specifically is, again, think about your opponents. Your opponents are going to ESPN. They're watching ESPN. So any news that is, from ESPN, you might as well assume everybody in your league has already seen that as well. So that means you would probably want to get creative, check for other sources that you can just get a different perspective from. The other thing, as far as literally picking the players, the approach I try to have is, again, if I'm assuming that I'm going to get things wrong, then I just want to have as many bullets in the barrel, so to speak. So a really good example of that for last season is, as far as quarterbacks that I liked, I basically take positions and try to have my own tiers of players that I want. So last year for quarterbacks, I knew that if it was going to be sort of middle rounds, then Cam Newton was a guy that I liked. I also liked Jameis Winston. I also liked Kyler Murray. So those were going into every draft. I said, okay, if I can get 2 out of these three quarterbacks, I feel good about my season. And the philosophy there is, I definitely don't know if Cam Newton's going to do well. I don't know if Kyler or Jameis is going to do well, but I definitely know one of them will. Now, maybe I get it really, really wrong. That's variance. You're unlucky. But chances are one of those three guys is going to do well. And I like them because of where I knew I could get them in drafts. Another example would be, with running back. There were a collection of middle round running backs that I liked, including David Montgomery and Austin.
Oh, my God. Don't even start me there. You fucked me on that one, Aaron. You fucked me on that one. We talked. I drafted him. I said, sleeper. Fucking suck.
We did.
You need to stop saying sleeper in drafts. I think that's your lesson you need to learn.
Say something, dude.
Yeah, it's almost like the death knell. But the example there, though, is, David Montgomery was a guy that I liked and got a lot of, but Austin Eckler was also a guy that I liked and got a lot of as well.
Yeah.
So, that
as well.
Right. So the same idea is, okay, I don't know which of these guys is going to hit, but I feel confident that one of them is. So I think for me, having that kind of approach to it, it helps to actually eliminate your risk. Because, again, if I'm taking 4 running backs in a draft and I'm hoping that 2 of them hit really well, I'm figuring I'm probably going to end up picking up another running back at some point during the season, then it takes a little bit of the pressure off.
That's true. So let's say you're in a 12-man PPR league like ours. So what is, if you're, okay, that's obviously 12 people, it's very deep. So me and you've talked about taking a quarterback relatively late, right, et cetera. So what are your priorities if you do the research, as you're saying, you know thyself, be fearless like Walter, whatever. So what are your strategies? And, okay, what do I need to get first? What do I need to get second? And then, what's the least of my priorities?
So the first thing that I'm worried about is running back. And for, I think, some people that are familiar with sort of the zero running back strategy that's become really sexy.
What is that? I don't know what that means.
Okay, so zero running back is this drafting philosophy that got popular probably, going back 5 years or so. And the idea is that the common knowledge in fantasy football drafts is that you take running backs, load up on running backs first. And so the idea was to say, okay, if people are loading up on running backs, then what if you don't draft any running backs at all your first few picks? Wait until round 4 or 5 to get your running backs. First of all, that only can work in PPR leagues, right? Because those
receivers,
that are available in rounds 4 or 5 are going to be third down back guys. They're not going to be, workhorse backs. But the workhorse thing is actually the reason why I think it's still crucial to get a couple of running backs early, and at least one that you're going to be able to count on in those first 2 rounds, because there's so few backs now in the league who actually have a full share of the work. So many, coaches, and I think a lot of it goes to data, right? Like teams can see that, 300, 400 carries has on a person. So
death.
So basically because it's such a limited pool that you can get from to get those elite running backs, I think if you are sitting, in those first, 5 picks of a draft, I think it's one of those things where you shouldn't overthink it. Go ahead and get your bell cow running back there if you can. And the other position that I'm prioritizing at the top of drafts is also wide receiver. And it's for a similar
PPR league, right? Just to make sure.
Right, in PPR leagues. And to be honest with you, even in non-PPR leagues, it's important to get one of those wide receivers. And the idea behind it goes to what's the opportunity cost, right? And what I mean by that is, take the tight end position, for example. There's a pretty big fall off from the top 2 or 3 tight ends to the number 4, the number 5, and then another fall off to sort of those 6 through maybe 12 tight ends. But that 6 through 12 are kind of all the same in terms of projection, ADP, and all that. So what that means is there's a really high opportunity cost at the top, because if you don't get those guys, then they're gone. But you have to juxtapose that to, okay, if I were to take a tight end in the second round or the third round, then that means I'm getting a guy who maybe is going to score maybe 220, 250 fantasy points on the season, whereas I'm missing out on a running back or a wide receiver who's going to score 350. So it's one of those things where if you can get 2 running backs you can count on, 2 wide receivers you can count on, then it frees you up to do things, in those 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th rounds where you can just be taking shots on guys. You can just be, taking a shot on guys like Austin Eckler, taking a shot on people that you like, maybe that you read about. And the same ideology applies. You really just need 2 of those picks to really hit for you as a solid flex.
Which would be the ceiling.
So right? that would be drafting with a ceiling, mindset. So basically you're looking for, okay, best case scenario for these guys, I think it could look pretty good, so I'm going to take a few shots. Whereas at the top of the draft, you want to be thinking, in my opinion, extremely conservatively. So your first pick isn't something that I think you should be trying to make a statement with or trying to get into.
like I did Marcus Lattimore, man.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
I'm sure Aaron has heard about that one.
Yeah. So it's not where you want to plant your flag and make any bold calls. It's where you want to get a player that you're going to say, okay.
God, Malcolm planted that flag deep.
That's funny.
And it can be painful when that happens, right? So, and then in terms of with quarterbacks, kind of that difference, right, is with quarterbacks, like, for example, a Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or something like that.
Now,
yes, those guys are at the top of, the fantasy, projection outlook.
Yeah.
But every single season, there's so much value at quarterback at the bottom of drafts. Every single season.
Well, if I can interject real quick, Aaron, because I'm going to cut you off, but like going back to the tight end thing. So this is something that me and Kyle talked about last podcast, where these conversations, not all of it, but we had that. And so I drafted Mark Andrews super late because what you told me, you said, Kyle, can you pull this up?
Yeah, I'll pull it up.
You said to me, the same thing about tight ends, right? You're not going to get that big of a difference with when you're drafting a tight end, because the point value isn't like a major difference. And so I drafted Mark Andrews the 13th round.
Yep, 13th.
Click on Mark Andrews and see how many points. He was the 5th tight end overall, so 201 fantasy points. Now, to everyone out there, that was 110,000% Aaron Watkins telling me what to do. I mean, it's funny that he talked about Cam Newton, Kyler Murray, and my 8th and 9th pick are Cam Newton. So clearly, I mean, but besides that, on a serious note, Mark Andrews, I got him super late, and that was because of what Aaron told me. This guy, okay, he's tight end, get him late, and we'll see what happens. And Mark Andrews went the fuck off.
Yeah, and
fortunately for the wrong team, but
or the right team, depending on who you're asking. But I think to that point, though, Mark Andrews, perfect example, probably becomes a guy that, depending on how ADP shakes out, might be undraftable this year, right? So that's kind of the thing, is that now that value rises and he shoots up to the top, the opportunity cost, again, becomes too expensive, in my opinion. I think there were a couple of rare seasons where Rob Gronkowski, might have justified a second-round pick or a third-round pick, but those are so few and far between that my general approach is to just only target, tight ends in the later rounds, 6, 7, 8 at least.
So
Yeah,
let me ask you this.
let me just say something. Speaking of drafting, I know in our league, a bunch of people, and I may even fall victim to this, we sort of draft our teams. So we get our 2 running backs, our flex, our 2 wide receivers, our tight end, our quarterback, and then we immediately look at our starting roster and like, okay, we need a kicker and a defense now instead of adding depth pieces.
No.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Like, if you look at this example right here, somebody in our league filled out their whole team, took kicker in the 10th round.
Well, hang on, Aaron. I know you're passionate about this. And before you answer, and I want you to answer with like the most like uttermost like whatever you have to say, because that is
and then
like, I forgot Joey took
this other team, Tucker's Diddy, Taylor.
Don't even bring up Taylor.
The commissioner now took a defense in the 7th round.
Play fantasy football, man. That's funny. That's really funny. Anyways.
Yeah, my take on that is I just think it's completely egregious. It hurts my heart when I see it because it's just you see that and you're like, hey, this is a misguided soul. It's a lost soul out here in the fantasy landscape.
And to clarify real quick, I was absolutely talking shit the entire previous fantasy football season to everyone who's listening. And it was mainly because I was listening to Aaron. So if you guys are mad at me, go be mad at Aaron.
Perfect.
Please continue.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think I get the maybe temptation on that, right? You're just going through and you're just putting a roster together. But again, that's assuming that all of your previous picks were correct. That's assuming that you just nailed every single one of those picks. And for me, that's really kind of a crazy opinion to have, right? Like if in that moment a person were to ask themselves, okay, am I 100% confident that every one of these picks are going to hit? There's no way you could say yes. The simple reason is because any of those players could get hurt. So from that idea, well, the same concept applies. The difference between the top defense and, maybe the 10th best defense isn't significant enough to cause you to miss out on potentially drafting an Austin Eckler or cause you to miss out on a Mark Andrews or have you in a position where you can't get a Kyler Murray late. Those are the kinds of mistakes that I think are preventable by just having, the right mindset.
So let's say that you draft your team, okay, and regardless of the draft results, you're stuck with what you got. You're fucked, okay? In my situation, you're fucked usually. And so you're looking at your roster baiting, okay, and you've got maybe 2 players that first, second, third round, you're like, over. So let me ask you this question, because this came up for me a lot. How crucial is it for the team you're playing against? And is there anything you can do week by week to give yourself the advantage that you need to pull a W out?
I think there's definitely things you can do week by week.
Kyle, get that shit off the fucking screen. The Chiefs won the Super Bowl last year, okay?
Did they win the fantasy Super Bowl?
Okay. Well, Mahomes did, so fuck you.
Dude, we still got to talk about Tom Brady this episode.
Yeah, we're going to.
Okay. But no, to answer your question though about sort of that impact, there's definitely things I think you can do week to week, and I think that's really the difference. I think, like I said, I don't believe you can really win your league in the draft, even if you have a really good one. And the reason why is every year there's going to be multiple running backs that weren't drafted that are going to finish the top 10 or top 15. those are players that you're going to want to add. You're going to want to know about those guys before your opponents do. There's going to be wide receivers. There's going to be tight ends. There's going to be defenses that, ended up doing better than people expected or get hot. Trades are going to happen. Injuries are going to happen. So I think top of the waiver wire is one of those things that if you're going to play a season-long fantasy football format, I think you've got to also be prepared to have some research time, week to week, whether that be listening to a podcast, reading an article, whatever it is, do something so that every week you're at least checking the waiver wire. Even if you're not picking a player up, you should know who's there. And if there's players that other people get, it should be because they either outbid you in an auction type, environment.
Oh, thank God you said
that. Because it was a roster spot you didn't need to fill. Like you made the call to pass on that guy. You basically never want to, get that alert, that waivers close on Wednesday or whatever, and see that someone picked up this guy that you just heard about and you're late. That's the worst feeling.
So would you recommend, and I'm sorry, my audio cut out for a little bit. Would you recommend, and if you said this, I'm sorry, but
that's probably a good thing, but
yeah. No, it's funny. Would you recommend, let's say that I work 40, 50 hours a week, okay? Would you say listening to fantasy football podcasts make me better? Or what are some tips and tricks that I can kind of cut into my week to make me more proficient after my draft?
Yeah. I think podcasts are usually, especially nowadays, have been my go-to. Malcolm, as you know, there's jobs we've had where we were working 70 hours, or 80 hours.
It was
and so in that drive to work, in that drive from work, perfect time, for me to listen to a podcast. And again, that's where you can just constantly be getting that information because it doesn't stop. And if you can know about things that are happening in practice, you can know about things, that maybe a coach said to a beat writer, things that beat writers are observing, that's the kind of stuff that, like you said, we as, regular people, we're not working in fantasy full time. We're not going to be on top of that 100% of the time, but there are people who will be. So to me, it just makes sense to listen to that information because basically you can get it for free.
Now, that's the question I was going to ask you earlier that I just remembered. So, and if you're uncomfortable with this, just tell me, okay? Because we can edit this out. But how much money have you won, would you say, total playing fantasy football? I'm not talking about your losses. Okay, I know we talk about – I'm not talking about what you won versus losses. I'm saying take away the losses. How much money have you roughly won playing fantasy?
And this is season long and DFS, right?
Well, this is just give me since you started playing, give me a rough dollar amount.
I mean, I would have to say at least 8,000.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'd probably say at least 8,000. I don't know. For season-long leagues, it's, probably a couple thousand off of those if you just add all of them up.
I'm saying add everything together. Total everything. It's about $8,000.
I think that's what I would say. I mean, probably. I mean, it's so hard to think about.
I know.
Because it's from just literal tournament wins. That's probably about $8,000. So from one-off, season-long wins, and the Saya Office League and stuff like that.
I'm talking about strictly DFS gambling. Yeah,
I'd probably say 8,000 or 9,000 for just NFL,
which is a fucking lot for someone who's not. I mean,
definitely.
that's what I'm saying is that's what gets me to my next question. So people don't understand. I rub my eyeballs because it stresses me out even thinking about this. I will text Aaron on a Saturday, and he says, I'm doing my fantasy football shit. And then at like 6 a.m., he goes to bed to wake up for the main slate. So that brings me to my next question. Outside of the coding stuff, okay, is there anything that a normal fantasy football player can do if they I'm talking like go outside the box, if we want to win, put the hours in, what can we do as average people to succeed and get that first place win?
I mean, I think that's so tough because, it depends on your time, right? So say if you do have maybe 10 hours a week that you could commit to it, then I think that goes back to my other point about finding those other resources. Find those websites that you like. As far as ones that I would recommend, I think fantasypros.com is a solid one that does a lot of good work for free. Roto Grinders does some season-long content.
Roto Grinders, that's the one, yeah.
Yeah, Roto Grinders does some season-long stuff, but there's tons of them out there. 4for4 or Action Network, I think, is one that started doing some stuff. So basically just going out, finding these places and just reading those articles. I mean, there's a lot of really great content out there for free that will tell you week by week, here's who you should be looking to pick up. Here's who you should be maybe looking to trade. Here's who you should maybe be looking to acquire via trade. All that different kind of thing. And then if you have less time, you can't really be researching and stuff like that. I would say at least find an hour, right? I mean, you can at least find an hour a week.
Well, you're taking this shit. We're all guys here.
Yeah, you're right. And to be completely honest with you, most of my season-long work, like during the NFL season, most of my time in fantasy is spent for DFS, right? But my season-long decisions are mostly made sitting on the Twitter,
That's awesome, man. That's
everybody listening is nodding their head like, yep, that's me.
Exactly. So, but again, if you're in that process of just constantly listening, you're listening to podcasts, when you have time, maybe you turn on the fantasy show on ESPN. Even though a lot of people are going to see it, there's still some people who you might be surprised they're not doing stuff like that. They're not watching anything. So any of those little times you get, just have the fantasy community in your ear. And so when you're sitting on the toilet Tuesday morning, you're going to make smarter decisions because you're informed, right? That's the whole difference. Is if you're just guessing, then there really isn't much point in playing, in my opinion.
Yeah,
That's not
but not to cut you off, but that, and you've said that to me before, and it begs the question. So we're all doing that. What can I do to separate myself? Like, what can I listen to? What can I go after to actually put myself above someone else?
That's where the edge comes in. And that comes to sort of the idea behind it is, like you said, and I ask myself that question for every league I'm in every season is, how can I gain an edge over my opponents? Now, for me, what that answer is to be more prepared than any of my opponents. Every draft I go in, I feel extremely confident. Not that I'm the smartest guy, definitely not, the opposite, but I feel very confident that I'm the most prepared, that no one has done more mock drafts than I have. No one has read more articles. No one has listened to more podcasts. No one has watched more videos. Now, for other people, or even for myself, sometimes that edge, for leagues I'm in where I know, like, yes, the people are good, they're experienced players, then that my edge there comes from, maybe this isn't necessarily the answer you were looking for, but from being interested in topics like game theory, right? Being interested in topics about randomness, about decision making, in exposing myself to information about making decisions and assessing risk that isn't a fantasy football article. Because at the end of the day, if you are in one of those leagues where a lot of people are quote unquote sharp players, they're experienced, they're not going to do crazy stuff like take a QB first round or take a kicker in the 6th round or something like that. There's a predictability there. And in those kind of leagues, that's where you can get an edge by, you and I have talked about this before, by being anti-fragile, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, what are the things that everybody in my league knows? And how can I gain an advantage if that thing that everyone knows is going to happen or everyone knows is true ends up being false?
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just real quick, a perfect example to that is last season, the Cleveland Browns. Malcolm, you can attest to this. Everybody knows Cleveland Browns were the sexy team for fantasy football last year, right?
Yes.
Baker Mayfield, OBJ, Jarvis Landry, Kareem Hunt's on the roster.
Tight end?
Nick
Njoku. Just crazy talented team. So my thing was this, right? All of the information I was consuming, everyone was backing up this idea that they were going to be great because of, one, what these other players did in other systems outside of Cleveland. 2, they were also basing it off of Baker Mayfield's final 8 games of the season, so a really small sample. And 3, they were, in my opinion, completely ignoring the history of that division, which is a very hard-nosed, defensive type of division.
Oh, my God. Steelers, Ravens? Yeah.
Right, and even the Bengals have had great defense. Yeah,
great defensive teams. Front line.
So to me, I said, okay, everybody seems to know that the Cleveland Browns are going to be great. And I think you can get a sense for it when I don't want to lay people, right? And what I mean by lay people is not like people who don't know things, but just, some
retarded people. You can say it. It's just us.
People that Malcolm, we had offices where we worked with people who we didn't really value their opinion, right? So when people like that also know this thing that everyone knows, that should be a signal. And the way that I assessed it was, okay, let me consider the possibilities, right? So one possibility is everyone's right. The Cleveland Browns end up being really awesome. Well, the opportunity cost to get those guys is really high. OBJ, average draft position, I think was in the 2nd round, bottom of the 1st round. Jarvis Landry, I thought you were going to have to take him too high. Nick Chubb, I felt like you were going to have to take him too high, even though he ended up really having the best season out of all of them. And Baker Mayfield, I definitely thought was way too high.
Oh my God,
because people like Kyler Murray, Jameis Winston, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen were on the board several rounds, usually after you take Baker Mayfield. So my thing with that was, okay, what happens if everyone's wrong about this? If I completely avoid these players? Well, that could put me in a position where, one, I have no Cleveland Browns on any of my teams. So if they tank, I'm not going to be hurt and everyone else is going to be hurt. 2, I probably got to take players that ended up doing better than their Cleveland Brown alternative would have done. So, for example, in the 2nd round, instead of taking someone like Odell Beckham, I was taking a guy like Mike Evans. So obviously that worked out by the end of the season. And, later on in the draft, there's more examples of that. And again, passing on someone like a Baker Mayfield, because I knew I could get people like Kyler Murray and even Josh Allen later in the draft. So I think this season, there's going to be more examples of that. Last year, the Chiefs, to be honest, was another one that I really avoided, right? Because the opportunity cost on those guys was so high. And many of them, even though a lot of them had good seasons, obviously with Mahomes getting hurt for the stretch, most of them finished below their ADP. So
let's look. So this is just to prove your point. Okay. So this is our draft, right? So let's see how many Chiefs players get drafted God, look, Aaron, please feel free to rip these people. Le'Veon Bell gets drafted 4th overall.
That's a really good example of.
That's horrible.
Well, it's a really good example of not having intel, right?
Being retarded.
Well, because again, there was so much. For me, I felt like there was so much communication about a sort of weird relationship with him and Adam Gase. If you know the history of Adam Gase.
I would have a weird relationship with Adam Gase. Jesus.
Yeah, but that's
Exactly,
what I'm saying. So all 3 of us are football guys. But what I'm saying is, Aaron, there's maybe people who don't know that. So that's what I want to get to is like, what can they do? Is it just listening to podcasts and just spending the time to research, as you said?
And so the thing with that is, there's podcasts out there that are really good at preparing you. Even ESPN has a fantasy football podcast with, the guy.
Like Matthew Berry.
Matthew Berry. Do I like Matthew Berry?
Tell me. I know how you feel about him. I want people to know.
But before we get Aaron's opinion on this.
I have to pee.
Oh God. I would just like to say that I feel like early on, Matthew Berry was probably a good source. He got the fantasy community started in a way, but now I feel like he's more about entertainment, and ESPN in general is more about the entertainment when it comes to fantasy.
I would agree with that. I think that, for me, going back to those early days, when I was still in high school, that was my edge. Reading Matthew Berry's draft day manifesto, I did it religiously every year. That was my edge. To this day, I still read it. I just don't place as much importance on it or as much value because I know that so many more people are also reading it. So again, though, I think there's a lot of value in still looking at and still reading and listening to what your opponents are listening to, because again, then you can know where their mentality is or sort of what they're likely to do. And that could be another opportunity to get an edge.
Yeah, that's a good point there. All right, this was my draft. It wasn't.
Oh my God, here we go.
What? This is not even on the podcast. I'm just showing.
Go ahead.
All right, so Christian McCaffrey, obviously home run first round. And then I took AB, didn't play. Darius Geis didn't play. Josh Gordon didn't play. Penny barely played. Jalen Samuels didn't really play last year. Andrew Luck retired.
Dude, you had fucking one person winning the league. It's McCaffrey.
Hey, don't forget about Carson and Boyd and Godwin.
Listen, okay, go to my fucking draft. I showed Kyle.
It's right there.
Draft. Yeah, you see.
Before we move on to that one, though, I do want to point something out with that draft, because this is another thing that I see happen. And one of the podcast people I really like, Adam Levitan, he has this term, fancy play syndrome. An example of having too many FPS plays, right? Fancy play syndrome. So like the fancy play picks here, right, is the Antonio Brown, right?
Yeah.
The Darius Geis, right, saying, oh, this is a sleeper guy, everyone's forgotten about him. Rashad Penny is borderline, but the Josh Gordon pick, is definitely a fancy play syndrome pick. Now, the thing about it is there's still value in doing those.
This guy won.
Christian McCaffrey, Chris Carson's a great pick. Tyler Boyd ended up being strong.
Come, get off your team.
Dude, I picked up Devontae Parker.
Yeah, and Mike Boone, again, that's a guy clearly who was still managing the waiver wire. Was still clear. Yeah. The fact that you have Mike Boone on your team tells me you were at least listening to some podcasts or reading some articles, watching some shows. So again, that's an example of you can still overcome getting stuff wrong in the draft. And that's a perfect example that you are going to get things wrong. But in those spots, that Josh Gordon pick, I wonder if Austin Eckler was already gone. The Darius Geis pick, I wonder the same thing.
Let's see if Eckler was gone. It's actually a good point, Aaron.
Yeah, when I took Gordon, I could have got Kyler Murray, could have got Mark Andrews.
So let's look at this. This is what I want to ask you too, Aaron, because everyone who's listening to this, which will be our fantasy football people, are going to fucking throw up when they hear this. My draft, you've got David Johnson, who, whatever, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, 3rd round, David Montgomery, who was high, Robert Woods, to get him 5th round, Latavius Murray, hey, I mean, that's not that bad in the 6th round. Curtis Samuel, Cam Newton, Kyler Murray, Darwin Thompson, James Washington, who, whatever, Mecole in the 12th round, Mark Andrews, the best pick I had in the 13th round. So, looking at my roster, why did I come in such a shitty place?
Well, I think, with this one, obviously the David Johnson injury hurt a lot. And this is one of those cases where there were guys that you missed out on in terms of picking up in the season.
Excuse me?
Well, so you know what I mean in terms of like the waiver wire picks. Like picking guys up off of the waivers. There were.
That's because we had that fucking bullshit. Whoever lost had the first pick. Go back, hang on, and Aaron, I'm glad you're on this. God damn, I'm so glad you're on this call with us. Go back to the teams and go to Joey's team.
All right.
Which is his name was Party Like a Grant
Star, yeah.
So he picks up. Who'd he pick up because he lost early on? So he lost like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd week, Aaron, and he had the first waiver wire pick. And I think he got oh my God, James Conner. Right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did take James Conner.
But he dropped. But I'm saying is like, so if you look at the team that he drafted, okay.
Keep going.
Okay, he took Eckler 5th round, which is not a bad pick, right? But
Good, yeah.
he gets Matt Breida gets hurt, and he picks up James Conner because he fucking selected Justin Tucker 10th round.
Well, I mean, I think again, to me, I haven't participated in leagues that don't have a auction-based waiver wire system.
Say that one more time.
I personally haven't participated in leagues that don't have a auction-based waiver wire for at least like 2 or 3 seasons now.
Lovely.
To me, I consider it Bush League to not have that because it's so vital. It's so important.
Why is it vital? That's my 3rd question.
Well, for the very kind of reasons you just pointed out, right? There are going to be injuries. There are going to be guys that you draft who don't end up hitting, and the same way that that's true, there's going to be those guys that didn't get drafted, but all of a sudden someone's get hurt week 1, and they're going to go into a bell cow position, or someone has a good first couple of games, and then they have an explosion game, and now they're the number 1 waiver wire pickup. There's going to be those guys. And like I said, to me, what's crucial is getting those players. I've had leagues where I finished the regular season 7-6, just literally barely staying alive. But because I picked up the right guys, I was able to go on a tear in the postseason and win that championship. So I've won that way a few times. So it's one of those things where if you don't have some type of process where everyone can have, in theory, an equal opportunity to both succeed and fail in the market of the waiver wire, then I just think that's not American at the end of the day, right? I mean, to be really generic about it.
Capitalism.
Yeah, and to an extent, right, is just the idea of a free market and allowing people to be winners and allowing people to be losers if they mess up. And so if you have an auction budget and that first week there's an injury and you're like, you know what? No, I know all the answers. I know that this is the guy that's going to save my team. I'm blowing my whole budget to pick up this guy.
Who is going to be that guy in our league? So the guy that
everybody who doesn't listen to this,
I don't know, Joey's a Jew. Joey's a Jew, so I don't know. He's gonna have $100 left at the end of the season.
The Jew might just fucking keep money. He's like, oh, God, I'm gonna spend it.
But Malcolm,
works at Kroger. That's hilarious.
But Malcolm, at Saya, I can't remember the one guy's name, but the guy who he hung out with Evan a lot.
Sebastian.
Sebastian, yes. Yeah. So I remember in our work league last season, week 1, like after week 1, TJ Hawkinson had that crazy game. This guy spent damn near his entire auction budget to pick him up. And I remember I asked him about it, and I was like, man, like, did you understand the rules of like how this auction works? Like, do you feel like you're gonna get that money back? And he was like, oh yeah, no, he's gonna be great. And he was just as confident as could be.
I have no idea who that is, by the way.
The guy for TJ Hawkinson, the tight end.
That's the whole point. That's right.
2 touchdowns the whole season.
Exactly, and I'm pretty sure they were both from the same game, or maybe it was 1-1.
Yeah, 1-1, 25 fantasy points, and then his next highest was 11.
Right, so that's a perfect example, right? Where you want, in my opinion, you should have a market that allows a person who's going to make a really bad decision like that to suffer, right? I mean, that might sound harsh, but I think that's the way it should be. And you should be rewarded for knowing or maybe having more information as to who those guys are, where you're like, look, I've got to put a lot of money because I have to get this person. So yeah, I mean, if you don't have a waiver wire system that's like that, it can be really brutal because you're basically at the mercy of those teams that are at the bottom of the standings not being active. That's really the only way you're going to have a chance to get those guys.
So this is going to bring me to my fourth question, because now this is going to maybe not necessarily be like a fantasy football thing, but I have to ask you. You're in however many leagues, okay? And I know like one of those leagues, those are kind of your homies you grew up with in Baltimore and shit. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that we can do in this league to A, psychologically torture the other person? Or 2, is there anything that I can text strategically or call to my friends and get them to fuck up?
So you're trying to mislead the league.
It's a very simple question, Kyle. Shut the fuck up and let Aaron. I'm just saying, what can I do to throw these guys off, man? Is there anything that you can suggest?
I mean, this is probably going to be a disappointing answer, but I'm really not. I'm one of those guys that's actually pretty quiet during the season. I don't. I see everything in the group chat and stuff like that, but I don't often comment. I almost never talk shit, especially when I win. Like if I win, I'm really silent. I don't say anything. Say what?
Do you do often win your leagues? I know you usually come like first or second in most of your leagues.
Yeah. And in the league you were talking about that has been going, I think since
Sid, what's his name? Sid or?
Yeah, Sid is in it. Omar, Sema, a lot of people I grew up with.
Your homies.
Yeah. So that league I've won 4 out of the past 5 championships. And it kind of got a little obscene because I had won like 3 in a row at one point, and it actually kind of bummed me out because I like what I said I liked about fantasy is I love the skill of it. I love the challenge, and I think that's really just why I gravitated towards daily so much more. Is you're at that point you're dealing with guys that are really investing hours.
They're like you.
Yeah, they're like me and people that are even more intense and more experienced, and it's a lot harder. So I think for me that's also an edge. Is being involved in that world as well. Just forces me to think more critically and be sharper.
So this is going to bring me to my last question. Is we've talked about a lot this evening about, what makes or break a league, drafting, waiver wire, all these different type of ideologies or concepts to how I get first place in my league. So the last question I have, Aaron, is, in your opinion, what's the most important thing that you have to execute to get the W in your DFS or your friend league, whatever? Like, what's the number one thing?
So, like on a week-to-week basis?
Okay, excuse me. Let me reframe that. That's how technical I know you are. Like, in a friend league, season-based, what's the most important thing?
So again, to win the whole shebang, or to just win your matchup that week, like any given week to win your matchup?
God damn it. That brings me to like 8 different questions. No, seriously, Aaron, what's like the most important thing you could possibly say, like, okay, I have to do this in order to give myself a chance to win?
So I mean, I don't want to, always say the same things, but it just really is true that for me, I feel like what I need to do to give myself the best chance to win is to make the most informed decisions. I really think that for me, that's what it comes back to. And so to try to give like a tangible example of that is, in any given week, you have your matchup, who you're going up against. For me, I lean on process. The first thing I want to know is, who is my opponent, right? I want to, again, not to be philosophical, but I want to understand my opponent, right? Who's on their roster, they're coming up, their coming games.
Why they draft who they did, right?
I mean, there's that, but even, in a given week, even more specifically, to the extent of saying, okay, I'm going up against a guy that has Patrick Mahomes on his roster, and maybe he has Travis Kelce as well. So if I notice something like that, then my next thing I want to know is, okay, what does the matchup for Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes look like this week? Well, if I find out the Chiefs are playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, well, a person like me, I'm going to take a look at the Vegas line. Maybe that Vegas line is, 50 plus points. So now I'm going into that matchup saying, okay, I'm going to deal with maybe 20, 25, 30 points from Mahomes. Maybe I should be expecting 20 from Travis Kelce. I'm going to go through that same kind of process for my opponent's whole lineup. And I'm going to be checking their lineup every day leading up to the matchup because I want to know what I'm up against. So once I'm armed with that information, then I have an understanding of what I need to do to win that week. So
right.
Some weeks, maybe that means I need each of my players, I need to maximize the ceiling of my week, right? So maybe I have 2 wide receivers that, are pretty comparable. Well, I'm going to go to matchup and I'm going to say, okay, this person is playing in a shootout this week or is going up against a weak defense. So maybe they're a little bit more streaky, but they're at least going to give me access to a higher score than maybe wide receiver B, who's super solid and consistent, but rarely has those 25 or 30 point game.
Are you saying that the key, and this is going to sound very cliche and dumb, but are you saying that in order to win your friend fantasy league or a season-long EFC outside of DFS, it literally comes to analyzing on a week-by-week basis my matchup.
Did you just say analyzing or analyzing?
No, I said analyzing because I like big penises in my butthole.
You want to continue this Skype call later then?
That's gross, Kyle. Continue.
Oh, man.
I know it's going to be in the bloopers, but I'm saying, is that what you're saying? Like every week I have to be able to take a certain amount of time and go, okay, look at the matchup, look at the roster. Who do I have, good or bad? What do I have to do?
I think so. I think that's where it starts every week. You know, kind of what my process looks like in the season is, you know, you have your Monday night game, and at that point, that weekend's games are done, right? So every Monday night, I'm going to review my roster, and I'm going to review what decisions I made that week, right? So if I got it wrong, if I had one running back in my lineup, but this other running back on my bench scored more, I need to ask myself the question, okay, should I have known that? Should I have made a different choice? Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the person on your bench went off in a really fluke situation. You know, someone got hurt in a game, and so they ended up getting a ton more snaps than they would have previously. You know, some impossible information to know. It's important to not beat yourself up about that. At the same time, if there was some Sunday morning news that told you that a player was going to be out and that this player on your bench was going to start, then you also need to know that you made a mistake.
I'm laughing because we've all done that, where it's like, fuck, I forgot.
Absolutely. And I think those are important to recognize because, again, that goes back to the skill concept, right? Like, there's people who play fantasy and, you know, and Malcolm, I think what you're doing as a person who has struggled, what you're doing right now is actually the perfect thing you should be doing, is asking the question, how do I get better? Asking the question, what could I do different? Because I think what a lot of people who play fantasy do, and maybe they only play it for a few years, they don't have success, and then they stop, is if things don't go their way, they just say, oh, I got unlucky. Oh, I was unlucky. Oh, I was unlucky. And first of all, for me, that's just takes the fun out of it, right? Because if it just comes to luck, then I don't really want to play. And then two, it gives you no opportunity to improve because you're never going to think back and look at what you did the previous year. Okay, a good example for me is one question that has been bugging me all summer and all off season, if you will, is in that one league. You know, I was in like 5 or 6 leagues last year. 2 of them I won the championship. 1 of them I was in the final. And there was this one league where I had drafted Saquon Barkley first overall. And I didn't make the playoffs. That's the league that I've been thinking about all offseason. That's the draft choice I've been thinking about all offseason. And, you know, Malcolm, as you know, I've been doing this coding stuff. That's the thing that I'm researching to try to figure out, hey, how is there something I can do or build to prevent me from making the same kind of mistake? And I think in my reflection on the Saquon Barkley piece, I was actually starting to do a little bit of research on this before the podcast was how do running backs who finish first overall in a fantasy season, on average, how do they fare the following season? And, you know, with Saquon Barkley, he was the consensus number 1 ADP last year. But if we're thinking about things in an anti-fragile way, should I maybe have made a different choice? You know, that's a question that I'm still trying to figure out. And I'm really leaning towards yes, because of how highly Saquon finished the year before. There's something called recency bias that a lot of sports fans suffer from painfully because we're usually not even aware of it. You know, sports media tends to use recency bias. And what that looks like is because a player has done something recently, you just assume that will continue. You assume that will improve or whatever the case may be.
They can't be accurate. They can't be.
Right, and it's the kind of thing that more often than not proves to be wrong. Is that this thing that's recent, this recent success? Okay, you need to first understand why was that successful, and then ask yourself: is that thing that made this player successful going to continue? Is that system going to continue? Is the amount of touches or opportunity going to continue, et cetera, et cetera?
God damn, that is so smart. You smart bastard.
Well, and again, you say smart, but to me, the way that I look at it is I ask myself those questions because I first assume I don't know the answers. I first assume that I'm not smart. I assume that I don't know football. I assume every year that all the information I have about a player is wrong. And you should assume that because your information is biased, right? We go into the year and we say, okay, we know who Patrick Mahomes is. So everything Patrick Mahomes has done is going to happen every season. Maybe it will.
No, it's not. And I love your theory because it's not a theory. Aaron, you know how I am. My homies had the fact that this dude got paid is terrifying me. The fact that he's a fucking part royal owner terrifies me. Mahomes is going to come out week 3, drop back, and he's going to fucking get an ACL tear. Dude, this guy, listen, the Ravens, and to everyone listening, I know, Kyle, I'm sorry. Everyone listening, Aaron is from Baltimore. He went to Maryland University. He's a diehard Ravens fan. And funny enough, last year, me and him went to the Ravens and Chiefs games in Arrowhead, and we saw the 4th and 17 play that Mahomes threw to Tyreek Hill literally in the stadium, which was incredible. Saying that, I've got the Ravens winning next year. Hands down. Which brings me into the next question, and, the 6th question, 6th sense. Who, in your mind, if we have football, who are you looking at? Give me like your top 5, top 10, if you can. I know it's early. Guys that you're going, okay, this is like, what's up?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely guys I can mention off the top of my head, and it wouldn't necessarily be like in some kind of like ranking of like, okay, yeah, this is,
yeah,
1 through 15. Because I mean, it's super, super early.
It's too early, dude.
Yeah. But in terms of what I like, again, this is the point of the season where I'm trying to figure out who do the opponents like, who is everyone on, and where's the hidden value. So in light of that, at quarterback, a lot of people, obviously Lamar Jackson is going to be at the top of drafts this year. Mahomes is going to be at the top of drafts, of course.
Unfortunately.
To me, I'm really interested to see where Kyler Murray ends up in terms of ADP. I will say that I feel really high on Kyler Murray right now because I think he could be in a position to follow a similar kind of path that Mahomes and Jackson did. And what I mean by that is, those were guys who, had a rookie year that was quiet. Obviously, Murray played more, so he, quote unquote, did better than Jackson or Mahomes did their rookie seasons. But in their sophomore seasons is when Mahomes got his MVP, and that's when Jackson obviously got his MVP this past year. For Kyler Murray going into year 2, he's going to have the same coach. He's going to be working with a similar system. And I thought he was really impressive last year. So
shout out to you. You the one who told me to draft him.
Yeah. That's a guy that I'm really interested in because, again, I think running quarterbacks are actually really, really still undervalued in fantasy.
Of course.
Yeah, I think that's where the big edge is because, again, that's where that classic football knowledge comes in, right? Like, as a classic football fan, you know that you want a quarterback that you can count on in the pocket who can throw for 300 yards and 4 TDs. That's who you want. But the reality is running quarterbacks have way more value in fantasy simply because 10 rushing yards, that's going to be a point. Right, it takes 25 in most leagues. It takes 25 passing yards to get a point.
Get at 1 point, which is what we do.
Have a quarterback who might get 40 to 60 rushing yards a game, you're practically adding an additional touchdown in terms of fantasy points. Not to mention, most leagues, a rushing touchdown is going to be worth 6 points, whereas a passing touchdown is only worth 4. So having guys like a Josh Allen. I think that's where the big edge is because, again, that's where that classic football knowledge comes in, right? Like, as a classic football fan, you know that you want a quarterback that you can count on in the pocket who can throw for 300 yards and 4 TDs. That's who you want. But the reality is running quarterbacks have way more value in fantasy simply because 10 rushing yards, that's going to be a point. Right, it takes 25 in most leagues. It takes 25 passing yards to get a point.
Get at 1 point, which is what we do.
A quarterback who might get 40 to 60 rushing yards a game, you're practically adding an additional touchdown in terms of fantasy points. Not to mention, most leagues, a rushing touchdown is going to be worth 6 points, whereas a passing touchdown is only worth 4. So having guys like a Josh Allen or obviously what Lamar Jackson did.
Shout out to the white boy.
Absolutely, man. I mean, and I've seen some stats that are really
I'm serious.
Through the first 30 career games or something like that, Josh Allen has almost as many rushing yards as Mike Vick had.
Which is fucking awesome. No one talks about this dude. We got a white guy.
That's insane
fucking
to think about, though.
Destroying dudes. Like, Josh Allen is trucking dudes as a quarterback in the NFL. Do we not understand how hard it is to even make it to the NFL? As a football player my entire life, that was my dream. And the fact that this dude, like this white dude who's 6'3", 2-something, is like trucking linebackers in the fucking winter snow in Buffalo, I fucking love it.
Yeah, and again, a guy that's just really undervalued because he doesn't throw the prettiest ball. He's not the most accurate passer. He's definitely not.
Look at him. He's like the fucking like kid from Michigan who like snorted glue in 8th grade and just fucking made it to like the NFL.
And now he has Stephon Diggs on his team. Jesus.
Right.
That's insane. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So again, people like that. As far as like quarterbacks, that I really have confidence will be there later. I'm really interested in the Nick Foles situation. Chicago, I think, is where he signed.
That might be a nice fit, dude.
Yeah, again, Malcolm, as you know, that's a Matt Nagy offense. We all know what Matt Nagy was able to do with Alex Smith. Easily by far the best season of Alex Smith's career before Matt Nagy went to Chicago. So we also saw Mitch Trubisky's clear deficiencies and woes.
His success is that first year you told me to draft him.
Yeah, the first year.
Recognize the theme here, people.
Yeah, that first year.
Aaron has drafted all of Malcolm's teams.
First year, and again, it was simply because it was going to be Matt Nagy's first year. He was going to have this quarterback who had already shown some rushing prowess. And so his rookie season, he obviously ended up being a guy that came on really hot late and actually really helping in some daily fantasy contests too. So this year, Nick Foles being a guy.
Tell that story, Aaron? Can you tell that story after you're done with this?
Okay, yeah. Just like Nick Foles, I would say is a guy that I'm really interested in, and that offense I'm interested in as well. At running back, I think, again, look, the guys at the top are the guys at the top. If you have those picks, if you're picking 1 through 5, any of those top guys are going to be valuable. Someone I'm still worried about is Aaron Jones. Again, for me, what I look at a lot is opportunity, right? And for a guy to be sharing that many snaps and that many touches and passing targets with another back.
And they got Jordan Love, who's a running quarterback.
Yeah, and it's always something that's going to be concerning to me, especially if I feel like stock is really high on him. So he's a guy that I'm going to be very sensitive about his ADP. Derrick Henry is absolutely another one. You look at a guy who this year, his ADP is probably going to be maybe, a full 10 to 15 picks higher than it was last season. So that's another guy I'm going to be really sensitive about. And then, I think the situation in LA is interesting with not having Melvin Gordon this year. I think a lot of people really flock to Justin Jackson, I believe is his name, as that guy that's going to be a guy who's going to be getting a lot of work. But I'm interested in how that battle shakes out. I think this could end up being a similar situation to last year, where there were people who were on one side of the camp. Either they believed in Eckler or they believed in Jackson. I started getting the sense that a lot of people were believing in Jackson. And
Sebastian, Sebastian was the guy.
He was big on him. So my thing was to just say, okay, yeah, I'm clearly going to pivot. Because if you looked at opportunity from the previous year in games when Melvin Gordon was out, the Chargers told us who they liked. And that's another thing, too, is follow the usage.
Can you describe that? What do you mean the Chargers told us who they liked? Can you elaborate on
that? Follow the usage, right? So what I mean is the biggest, and there's so many studies that have been done that shows this, the single biggest predictor in fantasy football is opportunity. So what that means is, for a running back, for example, how many touches are they getting? How many snaps are they on the field for? Which snaps are they on the field for? Are they involved in the pass game? How many targets are they getting a game? How many targets could I expect them to get on the season? If you're going into your draft and you are picking running backs and you don't feel like you have solid answers to those questions, that should be a red flag to you. That's a problem, right? So you should know anytime you're taking a guy, you should know the range of outcomes you're expecting for him, because that's going to help you determine, again, you talk about whether you can take a risk on a player. Well, to me, Austin Eckler was a guy that I didn't consider a risk at all last year because I knew how involved, if healthy, he was.
God, what a safe pick.
And so I knew that, okay, at the bare minimum, this guy's going to be getting 5 targets a game. If he's getting 5 targets a game and 10 carries a game, that's a pretty modest workload, but that's enough where he's going to be exposed to touchdowns, and in PPR leagues, he's going to get point per reception, all that good stuff. So based on where you could get him in the draft, it just made sense. It really didn't seem like a risk. And with David Montgomery, to sort of
God damn it, that's a sore subject for me. This guy literally stuck his big black dick in my ass and fucked me all season.
It was a tough situation.
A tough situation, I would say, a dick in my ass.
That's
no
one way to describe
it. Yeah, I mean, it went south. But again, you look at that, I mean, what is that, 242 carries for a rookie? That's significant.
That's a lot of carries for a rookie.
Yeah, it's significant work. And so, again, the bet, again, when I'm thinking about, okay, I'm going to take a shot on a player, my thinking isn't based on, they're going to be this good. My thinking is they're going to get this much opportunity. And Keenan Allen was a guy that I really liked.
Third round, who I drafted. Every single person mentioned Aaron, I drafted.
Yeah, because
I got second to last, asshole.
That's because you only made 12 moves throughout the whole year.
Yeah, I was going to say that the waiver is the other piece of it. But Keenan Allen is a really great example, a guy that, isn't at the top of NFL top 100 rankings and isn't, this sexy wide receiver. He's not the Julio Jones and et cetera, et cetera. But my God, when that man is healthy, he just gets targeted. Now, without Phillip Rivers, I'm not really sure. It becomes a question mark. But going into last season, again, if it was a question of, all right, if this guy is healthy, I can basically pencil him in for about 10 targets a game. And if you can get that kind of usage, then fantasy points are just going to come. On the flip side of that, if there's a guy who maybe is only getting 3 to 4 targets a game, really good example is I want to say A.J. Brown, I think is his name, the tight end for the Tennessee Titans last year. I think it was a rookie who came on, ended up having like a few monster games. A.J. Brown. So if you look at his game log, right, this is a guy who had a couple of like 100-yard, 2 or 1 touchdown games with 5 or fewer targets. So that's the kind of thing that, and that basically like weeks 1 through 6, one big game isn't really justified by the usage. Now, if you look at the second half of the season, it's a completely different story, right? The targets go up, so the consistency goes up. The production goes up. And so he's a really great example of how opportunity is a big factor. Mark Andrews was purely an opportunity pick. Even as a Ravens fan, going into last season, I really couldn't tell you how talented Mark Andrews is or isn't, or how good he was or anything like that. But the one thing I could tell you is he was going to be getting targeted. And as far as I was concerned, that's the only thing that mattered. In an offense that didn't have a running back that was going to get a lot of targets out of the backfield, didn't have a single wide receiver we could point at and say, oh, they're going to be a target monster. And with a quarterback who had already shown a high rate of targeting his tight ends, it was something that just made complete sense to take a guy who you could get late in the draft who was going to get a lot of looks. As far as this season, a guy that I'm really, really interested in, potentially late in drafts at tight end, is Noah Fant in Denver. So, again, all of this stuff is really early right now.
My boy's throwing to him, Drew Lock.
Well, I mean, hey,
he might be a little bit of a late pick there.
I think he's going to be, available later. And there was a recent stat that I saw that said his, I think he had, how many receiving yards? Yeah, 562, right? And I think he's one of only 8 players, I think, in like the last 10 years to have done that as a rookie. The other 8 included guys like Mark Andrews, not Travis Kelce, but Rob Gronkowski, Aaron Hernandez, names like that. So again, this is a guy that probably isn't going to be on a lot of radars. But
until we draft Aaron.
Yeah, until now.
Until now.
Until everybody watches.
I'm so happy to have you on here because, listen, you are the ultimate, everything about fantasy football, and you probably say you won't.
Yeah, I'm barely scratching the surface.
Everything, and I wanted you to come on here, not only because of your knowledge and how smart you are when it comes to fantasy football, but the shit you're going to stir up in our league. All going to be going after fucking Noah now.
So,
he's going to get drafted.
I think we need to get Aaron
round.
to just tell everybody to draft Matt Barkley, and then we're good.
Right, yeah.
I have no idea how great to see you, dude. I love it.
Yeah, Matt Barkley, that's the winner pick right there.
Everybody draft him.
Yeah, that's the big ticket. But you said you wanted me to tell the story. You talked about the DraftKings thing, like when I left Verizon.
Yeah. I mean, I want you to tell kind of how you got into seriously into fantasy.
Yeah. So for me, I think back in 2015, I'm not sure if you guys remember, but that before that season, DraftKings I felt like they had commercials on every channel, or maybe
deal.
Yeah, yeah. And so I remember just seeing that and being like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, I've been playing fantasy football forever, so I'm going to play and dominate and win all this money. And I remember my very first weekend, I put $50 in and I ended up winning 150. And so I was like, oh, yeah, I'm good to go. That ended up being like my only winning week that season. And so basically, it started this process of getting exposed to daily fantasy sports where after that NFL season, I played NBA and had a lot of struggles. And I kept noticing like certain names that were at the top of these leaderboards and like certain people that they weren't winning every time, but, I kept noticing them in top 10 or top 25 and stuff like that. And that's when I recognized, okay, there's something that these people are doing that I'm not. Or there's something that some people know that I clearly don't. And that's when I just started Google searching stuff and I discovered this whole world, this whole community of fantasy football information and books. I mean, literally, I've read.
So you would read books?
Yeah, I've read like 2 or 3 books on fantasy football, and daily fantasy in particular, and read tons of articles and found interviews and podcasts and videos. And so I just started to really kind of obsess on all of that knowledge and information. And after a few years, I'd been playing what you would call micro stakes on DraftKings. So it's like, 25 cent, 50 cent, $1 games. And I had been tracking my ROI, right? My return on investment. And at the time I was working like this really terrible customer service job at Verizon. And basically the first 4 weeks of that season had gone pretty well. And my ROI was really solid. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to take a plunge. Did something pretty crazy. Just, left my job, took the rest of my paycheck and put it on the games that Sunday. And
nice.
God
yeah,
dang
just
it.
complete DGen life. And that was a Tuesday when I left my job, made that choice. And I just said, okay, I'm going to use the rest of this week and I'm going to treat fantasy football like my full-time job and see how I do. By Friday, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep because I was so nervous that I was about to literally ruin my life. And the lineup I ended up putting together, I had in daily fantasy, there's cash games and there's tournaments. Basically cash, it's sort of safer. Like you can't win crazy amounts of money unless you put crazy amounts up. And then tournaments are the ones where you can put in $20 and potentially win 5,000, 10,000, $1 million in some tournaments, whatever the case is. So I had this cash game lineup, which by the end of the 1:00 games on Sunday was completely dead. I mean, it was toast. And I had like $400 of action on it, was winning 0, and my stomach dropped. And I looked at my tournament lineups. I had 3 of them. One of them looked like it might be able to do something. And I remember going into the 4:00 games. I want to say this was 2016 or 2017. I had a stack that had Derek Carr with the Oakland Raiders and Amari Cooper. At the time, that was going into the 4:00 game. At that time, Michael Crabtree was still with the Raiders.
Yeah, the big guy.
And
Yeah.
he had just come off of like 2 consecutive really awesome games. And everybody was on Crabtree and he was the guy. Well, when I looked at the data, I noticed that they were actually getting practically the same amount of targets. And Amari Cooper was actually getting more red zone targets. And he had a higher average depth of target, basically meaning he was being targeted deeper downfield. So kind of like to my point before about looking at the usage and not the results, I just said, okay, well, if everybody's going to be on Crabtree, I'm just going to go with the guy that's actually getting more usage. And in that game, Derek Carr, I think, went for like 350 and 4 TDs. Amari Cooper ended up going for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Next thing I knew, I was in 4th place, and I was about to win $1,000. And I had Jordy Nelson going into the Sunday night game with the Packers. And first possession, he caught a touchdown.
A 90-yard touchdown. Yeah.
This was a short. This was
No.
a night game.
Oh,
And
okay.
it's like a short little like end zone route. He just like caught like a little back shoulder fade, and it ended up being like his only catch of the game. But it was a touchdown, and so it put me into first place, and it was just basically a sweat the whole rest of the night. So that weekend, I ended up winning, a little under $4,500, and I was like, okay, this is
excuse me, a what?
basically that tournament. That lineup, I won 4,000 off.
And how much money did you put into that?
I had put in like 600, 650, something like that, and I got it was like 43 something back. So I kind of was like, oh, okay, this is gonna be my life now. I made it. I'm gonna be a professional daily fantasy player. But there's variance with all that stuff, and. If you listen to any of those podcasts from the pros, they say, you should have at least a $10,000 bankroll separate from your actual like personal bank account. You should just have $10,000 literally that you're prepared to light on fire before you, do something as reckless as trying to make a living off of it. But either way, I was able to live the dream, for a few months. And even with going back to work and stuff like that, I still just kept at it and just kept studying and learning more. And since then, I've won a few more tournaments. The most recent one.
Elaborate on the one that you almost missed when you were working inside with me. That is. And Kyle, I haven't told you this yet, Kyle. Please listen to this.
Right. Yeah, that's a super super painful one.
I know. I'm sorry, man.
I'm going to preface this by saying,
are you opening old wounds?
Yeah, I'm going to preface this by saying I think one of the keys to being, like, if you're going to be really competitive and really into fantasy, I think one of the keys is being super even keel about everything. One, that means not getting too high on the highs and also not getting too low on the lows. So basically, this was last season. The Kansas City Chiefs were playing a Thursday night game. It was either a Monday night or a Thursday night game.
No, we played. It was against the Packers.
Yeah. Do you remember if it was a Thursday or Monday? It was some kind of prime time. It might have been.
It was prime time. No, it was Sunday night. Because we came back that Monday, and I was fucking Green Bay won. Now it's Pitt. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. So yeah, Sunday night, it was a primetime game. And like, if you don't know DraftKings at all, basically they have like these primetime slates and they call them showdowns. And it's basically like where you don't have to pick a full roster. Like you pick, maybe like 5, positions, and there's still a salary and all this kind of stuff. And the way it goes is they have like one, pretty big tournament. And then once that fills, there's still a salary and all this kind of stuff. And the way it goes is they have like one, pretty big tournament. And then once that fills, they have like a smaller version of that same setup. But it, again, it's a smaller field, so it's a smaller prize pool. So basically this tournament that I had entered into, same buy-in level, I think it was like a $10 buy-in. The main version of it awarded first place of $150,000. And the small version of it awarded first place of $2,000, right? So basically, I made a few lineups for it. Usual process as always was watching the game. Things were going pretty well. And basically just, I guess to talk about the technique of it is this was one particular night where it's the Chiefs, right? Prime time. So the one player, everyone is going to be on is Patrick Mahomes, and they're going to stack. So basically what I did is I just sort of took a different approach, and I got to give a lot of credit to Malcolm.
Thank you.
Information is key. I asked Malcolm how he felt about that game, huge Chiefs fan. And I remember he told me that he didn't think it was going to be a shootout. He thought it was going to be more of like a running game kind of situation. And actually, no, it wasn't Green Bay. It was Denver. Because what I did, because I had, I think I played like 2 running backs from both teams.
That's what it was. Yeah.
And I think I had like Travis Kelce and kicker or something like that. So basically, I didn't have Patrick Mahomes or Tyreek Hill in my lineup at all, which just immediately put that lineup in a very unique place. That ended up being a game where I think Patrick Mahomes like picked up a little bit of a nick, like came out for a little while, ended up just kind of being a sort of ugly game. I had both defenses as well.
Very defensive, low scoring.
And so, long story short, by the end of the night, I end up winning this tournament. I'm winning $2,000. And I'm like, okay, cool. Nice little win. I get to work that next morning. And I'm looking, again, same process. I always want to look, okay, what happened in other contests? What did other people do? Blah, blah, blah. And I look at the big version of this tournament. Now, I'm expecting to see, again, because there's more lineups entered, I'm expecting to see some lineup in first place that's like 10, 15, 20 points higher than mine. Well, I noticed the first place lineup only had scored like 1.5 more points than my lineup did. And the tough part is I noticed the second place lineup had actually scored fewer points than my lineup did. So in that particular tournament, and actually I misspoke, first place for this tournament is 500,000 or 300, and second place was the 150. And so essentially what I realized at that moment is had I entered maybe 20 minutes sooner and made it into the big contest, that same lineup would have actually won me 150,000 instead of 2,000. So, yeah.
And the story goes, I come to work because me and Aaron, we used to work together. And I walk in, and it's about 2 or 3 hours. We get a break, and, me and Aaron, you smoke cigarettes together outside. And you go outside, and Aaron goes, and I was like, what, man? And he was like, dude, I could have had it. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I remember seeing his face and the level of unenthusiasm and like non-excitement and almost like a bummer. I was like, what's going on, man? He was like, dude, I could have won like 150 grand last night. I was like, what? He goes, I was 20 minutes off of winning this money. And I went, you fucking dumb. I was like, what are you talking about, man?
Gosh, that hurts.
Like, and that was so funny is that was the closest I ever felt to winning 6 figures. I was like, you dumb. What are you talking about, man? That's awesome, though. That's how I felt like that in that moment. I knew Aaron made it as like a fantasy guy. I was like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's not just like blowing dicks in the back alley,
Jesus.
No, I actually was like, Aaron is like, okay, he knows what the fuck he's talking about.
All right, so that's going to do it for the latest episode of the League Fantasy Football League podcast. We're here with Malcolm McDaddy Shepherd. We just heard from Aaron, the fantasy guru.
Yes.
But we hope y'all learned something. Guys in our league, I hope you don't watch this. Don't pay attention to this because I'm going to draft all those players we talked about. And I'm going to come back with a repeat. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Shout out to my cuz.